So our topic for tonight, as all of you probably know, is or the topic is design systems, and we're gonna try to explore as many aspects of the world of design system, which is pretty broad. So probably, like I was talking today with our guest earlier, we're gonna need 2 episodes for this conversation because it's really hard to squeeze all the interesting ideas or all the important points in just 1 hour. But we're going to do our best to understand at least when you need to build design systems, why do we need them, who needs to build them, how do we build them, and what they're valuable and useful for. And also, I also have some cautionary tales myself around building design systems, and hopefully we'll unpack some of the things that can go wrong when you're using and building and maintaining design systems. So with this wonderful intro, I wanna introduce our guest for tonight, Catalina. She actually works as a design system specialist, so that job exists. If anyone in the audience is also very passionate about design systems, you can find a job that's like totally dedicated to this field. And I'm gonna let her tell us a couple of more words about herself and her design work. So, Catalina, thanks for accepting, and you have the stage.
Thanks for the invite. I hate talking about myself. I think it's just like one of the most awkward things that I ever have to do in every presentation. But I'm Catalina. I'm originally from Romania. I moved to the US, and I've been in the design system industry for like the last 4 years. I shifted from product work as a result of lack of patience. I think if you don't have patience and if you want to see your product shifting as fast as possible, and being adopted as fast as possible, I think design system is like the sweet spot. And I always found myself like trying to figure out whether or not I want to be a front-end developer or a designer, and I never was able to find that middle spot. So I feel like design system is just like the perfect area for everything. But I think just like a lot of other people in the design world, I started off as a graphic designer and then just started doing UX without really knowing whatever the heck I was doing. And it happened the same thing with design systems, and here I am.
So it's a very relatable story, actually. Probably many of us felt in the beginning of our career that we don't know what the heck we're doing. Sometimes you feel that even when you're very well ahead in your career. I think it's a natural feeling, and I think that it's like a signifier of growth, if you want. So if you don't know what you're doing, it means you're learning and you're growing. So that's not a bad thing. And it's really interesting that you were able to find an opportunity that's so niched and so aligned with what you're passionate about. And yeah, so I would want to maybe just understand, how did your passion for design systems start, and how come this company has a job that's like a dedicated design system specialist? It sounds very mature.
Yeah, well, I'm raving about the company. First off, I think I finally found like my crew, my guys, my team. It's just, they are perfect. They're super supportive. Some of them, they might be in this call today. But basically, I've been marketing myself with design systems since the moment I realized that I want to pursue design systems. And it happened by accident, really. When I started in UX, I was part of a team, and the company went through several changes. And because a lot of people were leaving the organization, many of the projects came to me, a lot of them. One of them happened to be design systems. And I had the luck to have like a front-end developer that I was working with really well, a UI designer, and we just kind of started putting the design system together. At the same time, actually, that was the same time when I had the opportunity to listen to Brad Frost at an event coming in Cleveland. And I met him in person, and I was like, that was just like the big bang right in my mind. I was like, oh my God, beyond style guys, design system, like it's just so cool. I just like this guy so much. He knows what he's talking about. I want to be like him. I'm so far from being like him, but he's just like, I aspire to have his level of knowledge. He's obviously the founder of Atomic Design. So I just started doing it. And I think the following job after, and even in my portfolio, I tried to highlight as much as possible design systems. And then I started speaking at events. Again, like I was very new. I just kind of started inserting myself in the community and be like, I know this thing, and I'm just going to start speaking about it and connect with people. And then I started doing research by myself and interviewing developers and designers just to kind of uncover their pain points when they work together. If you remember, a few years ago, I actually reached out to you because I have a talk and I implemented some of your feedback. And the previous company that I worked for, the design system was very, very different. I think every single company that I worked for and where I had the chance to work on the design system, nothing is the same. Like, I think one of the most important takeaway from today will be that there is no one size fits all. And then I just kind of came across the position at Automox 6 months ago on LinkedIn. My portfolio wasn't even completed. It's still my portfolio from 4 years ago. And I was like, what the heck? I'm just going to go ahead and apply. The day after they contacted me, and I'm in, and I love it. Not planning to leave anytime soon.
That's great. I mean, I'm really happy to hear about happy people in their roles. It's always a nice story to hear, and I think it gives hope to anyone who aspires to find their niche, their tribe, the place where they would be super happy and excited to work on meaningful work, or the things they're truly passionate about. So with this wonderful intro, and with the understanding the context you come from and the background and everything, I'm gonna jump straight ahead into the topic for today and ask you, what are design systems in the first place? So what is a design system?
Not a style guide. I know that's like just like not the ultimate answer, but it's not a style guide. I think when design system just kind of like started kicking off, everybody was like, there's like this complex style guide and you might have some code, but it's not necessary. And I'm like, no. And I don't even know how I would define it, because I think it's very different for every company, but I just think about it as a set of guidelines, and those guidelines can be defined through several different ways. Like, it can be defined through code, it can be defined through, I don't know, Confluence pages, a website, it can be defined in Figma or whatever tools you guys are using. I think the most important thing when it comes to it, you have to think about who's going to utilize it. Just same like with any other type of product process, like when you're building a website or a feature or anything like that, you have to think about like who's going to use it and how are they going to utilize that. And it's the same thing with design systems. Like, developers are never going to consume a Word document with guidelines. So what's the best way to build it in a way that it's consumable, digestible, in a way that helps with onboarding? It includes code. I would say that, like, to me, is about shared ownership. And if you're thinking that just the designers on the design system, is just, you're already starting on the wrong foot. And it's a set of guidelines, and those guidelines can be code, can be design, can be stuff from branding, marketing, whatever fits the company's needs and whatever helps to solve the problem you're trying to solve in the first place through that design system.
I love this definition. I especially love the first nugget about not being a style guide. I think it's often mistaken for that, and I think that it's often much more than that. So even when I actually worked on two design systems for two big corporate enterprise companies, and design systems also have to like accommodate different products, so that's where the process got very challenging for us. But indeed, I feel that it for us, again and again, the lesson was that it's not a style guide, it's much more than that. You need overarching principles, you need a lot of things. And I really also appreciated your mention around being a very specific set of guidelines and rules, and it's very individual per each company or product or team that it serves. So that's another important point, and the point about shared ownership, which I already wrote in the chat, that I really loved. So yeah, I think that I would like to hear your opinion around when a company or a team or a product might need a design system. Does every team or every company does everybody need a design system, or sometimes you just can use a UI kit or a very basic style guide and that's it, it builds enough alignment? Or yeah, so I think it's two questions in one. The first would be, do you need a design system all the time? And if not, when do you need one and when do you not need one?
I think I'm gonna sound like every designer ever and say it depends. So I think one of the most important things is to start as soon as possible, right? And you can have, I don't know, if it's just a team of developers, think about what you're trying to solve again through the design system. You can solve efficiencies in how you're developing, how quickly you develop. You can solve tech debt that can be, it happens, those things happen through time. So if you think about like that period of time in the future, it's better to catch the problem that happens up front versus like wait all the way till the end. Now, I'm not saying that every single company will have the level of complexity of a design system that material design has, obviously, or any other large corporation design system out there. Like for instance, you might not necessarily have to address mobile as a platform, like iOS versus Android versus web. Like that's like a whole other like beast within its own, versus if you just focus on like web applications. So it's really, it depends. Like I think a design system is helpful at any stage, just to answer to the question. What it contains and how is it built, it also depends on the level of maturity when it comes to the organization UX team versus development team, and just the overall understanding of the process and design handoff. Because we all know about like the typical battle between like the developer and the designer, and when there was no UX team, developers were kind of like doing everything, and who are these guys coming in now and telling us what to do? So it's
Yeah,
important to build that bridge to help fill that gap, and I think the design system helps with that.
so you would say that it also acts like a bridge or unifier
Absolutely.
between the
Yeah,
and the engineering work, right?
for
But
sure.
I think it, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I wanted to ask whether you think that, so are there design systems that can exist in isolation without being actually built by developers into components? So is it a design system if the developers are not using it? So, but it's like, it has to be built to be a proper design system, right? Or how do you see this relationship between the actual components that are being used and just a sketch file or Figma file or whatever that just describes things, but that don't get implemented by the development team?
They need to communicate with one another, otherwise you end up just with design recommendations, and it's the same thing like when you're going to the design handoff process and then you get like the idea of MVP. Oh, this is just going to be MVP, and then we're going to implement your actual design, and that never happens. So let's avoid that from happening. And how can you avoid that is just by trying to create that connection with the development team. And it's tough because sometimes you would have to like find the middle ground, right? Which it means you might not necessarily be the happiest with your final decision or final approach. And I like, as far as my process currently, I am with my coworker, we are like both in dedicated roles. He's a hybrid role, he's like the developer. But to ensure that everything is being implemented, everything that I'm building, like I'm telling you, it's constant collaboration. Like we're always kidding, we work remote, but it feels like we shouldn't be in the same office at all times because we ping each other throughout the day so much. And I work usually a few sprints ahead of him, create those components, and then he goes ahead and implements those components. If you're building a design system from the beginning, and if you don't know if the company will fully get the buy-in or be fully on board with what the strategy and the plan is, I usually start a design system. Like at the Automox firm right now, things are a little bit different because I already obviously came into the design system role, so I don't have to have the battle to make people understand the importance of it. It's more so like just doing it, versus in the past, I felt like I always had to articulate the importance of it. So I was doing that by building a case study, whether it was through a project, like building the components to support that particular project, or building a single component and finding that one advocate that loves UX or is into front-end development across the company, and just work with them really closely. And I'm going to respond to a very tough question that I think at some point is going to come. And I usually get this question. If you don't have a front-end developer, you need to. Like, I remember I asked this question Brad Frost back in 2017 when I worked for an organization that supposedly had like full stack developers, but they were mostly backend. And I went and I asked him, like, what do I do? And he's like, you can't do anything. You need to have front-end developers. Like, you need to have at least one person to help you and support you with that. And if you don't, it's going to be really tough for you to take the battle on by yourself, or at least find someone that's passionate about it. Jared Spool has like this idea of team influencers. Find out who are the team influencers, like who are the loudest voice in those teams, and try to partner with those guys because they will be influencing the other members of the team to utilize and adopt the design system.
These are super valuable points, and they're kind of taking me back to my experience with design system and how we were actually struggling to find the champions that would advocate design systems to the engineering team, who at that point, I don't know, maybe it was our fault as designers, and maybe the design team was failing to articulate the value of a design system, because for them things worked. Why do we need a design system? Why should we over engineer, over complicate things when we're building this product? It's working, it's good. Why do we need that? And so we really had a difficult time having these conversations. And I think that we kind of started winning ground once we had someone from their side advocating, championing design systems. So once we had an engineer that kind of understood what design systems will bring, the clarity, the alignment, the ease of the speed and everything. So once we got those people talking about it, then it became much easier. So it's a very important point to anyone who is on this journey right now. Find your champions, find the evangelists in your organization, and put them to to use in your advantage. Definitely. Great point. So yeah, this is quite a tangible piece of advice. Let's go into the very tangible realm of actually building a design system. Let's say I'm a designer in a company that doesn't have a design system. How do I start? How do you actually build a design system once you've established that there's a need for it?
So going back to finding the advocates, I think that's like number one still. You might have to start building a use case, or at least hopefully you have the support of your own team, because if you don't have that, then you have a problem and you just need to move on. But basically, the way I was doing it in the past is always starting with an inventory, just to try to articulate the need. Like for instance, I remember the first inventory I've done, I found like 30 different shades of blue across our application, and so many different call to action, because some of the platforms were living on like old technology versus some of them were updated. And at the same time, the architects were working on a project called tech currency. So they were like, there was like a full update all across the org. Everybody wanted to standardize everything. So that's like step number one. And then it's important like to articulate the idea of the style guide. So probably a style guide exists at a time when you're in one organization. Now it becomes interesting if the style guide, let's say, serves the external website, and you might not be working on the external website, and maybe work on the platform. You don't necessarily need to utilize their style guide. Like that's something that we're doing right now, but collaborate with them. Make sure that, you know, if the primary color is orange, you're not going to come out with like the darkest blue that has nothing to do with the branding. So it still needs to be somewhat aligned. And you always start, I'm referring back to the atomic design process that Brad Frost defined. You always start off with like the idea of atom, like what's like the smallest part, or like design tokens even smaller than that, or like the smallest parts that will be utilized when you're building the main components. And it's usually color, typography, maybe some spacing being defined, some high level layouts, and then you're going into the actual components. And it's very interesting because at my current company, I am designing and I'm also strategizing, and I'm also building some documentation for onboarding. And it's kind of like, man, like there's a million of things happening at the same time. So for the first couple of months, you're going to be feeling that as you're building like that baseline first layer of components that will help you build the other things in the future. And as far as documentation, again, like think about how it's going to be used. Do you have a big design team? If it's a small design team, you might not need as much right now, but what are the plans? When is the team going to extend? And how will the developers consume those things? And the other thing that is actually very interesting about design systems, and I found this out at my previous company, you can have design systems that are built on top of other design systems. So for instance, take for instance, Lightning design system. We were building a CRM platform and we were utilizing Salesforce. Not a fan of Lightning design system at all. That's a whole other conversation. But basically, we were utilizing everything from there, customizing, applying our own theming, and then documenting those ones in our design system. So we had like different level of documentation. One was for the Salesforce developers, and then one was internal things that we were um, customizing and adjusting to fit our company needs. And obviously, like in the process, it's like so complex because you have to establish that governance process as you're starting to build a component. So you're doing two things at the same time, and you test things out. You see what it works and what it doesn't. Like a lot of the gaps you're gonna find out as you're going through those things. Okay, maybe we need to have like a more in-depth review process. And maybe when you build like the base design tokens, you need to involve branding in your review process. But when you're going into components, maybe involve developers. And then maybe when you're going into like patterns and layouts and more complex things, work closely with the product owners, because these are the guys that own specific areas of the applications or applications, and they will have a say into your work no matter what. So just to make sure that they have this level of collaboration and transparency all across the process, it's going to ensure the success of the design system. And obviously there's like the testing part, like not only usability testing when you go into complex patterns, but QE, QA, however you want to call it. And then something that I would like to explore going into next year, I was doing it in the past, not as well. I would like to do it better, but like measuring adoption and seeing how people are utilizing the design system. So I know that Figma has analytics built in. So seeing how many detachments and why the detachments are happening. And then on the development side, seeing how many times the component was called, if it was customized, if it was adjusted. And it's not to go and chase after the designers or anyone that makes a change, just to understand why the design system changed and why the component was attached. Is it because of a gap? Is it because I built it wrong? See it as an opportunity to grow the component and the design system.
There are a lot of things to unpack there. I really feel like there's a high level of complexity that designers need to deal with when they're also doing, especially when they're also doing design, and building a design system is something they do like a side project in their design role. It's really difficult to manage. I've been in this situation twice, and it becomes incredibly hard. And I remember reading an interesting take around how design system actually required their own roadmap, their own team, especially in large organizations. It's really hard to have designers like working part-time on the design system. It's really important to have a roadmap of itself, and hopefully a product manager that's working just on the design system, and one or a couple of designers working just on the design system. That's, I think, ideal for complex problems.
I'm trying to articulate that to my current organization because it's just the two of us and we're doing everything. And I'm like, we need more headcount. We need more people because it's gonna grow, and the more it grows, and the more people you need, and especially if accessibility becomes a focus because you can solve some of that through the design system, you need specialized people in those roles because it's literally impossible. Like if you think about T-shaped people, like you can know some information versus X-shaped people, but you're not the specialist in the area. That's why you have people that work in specific roles to help support the growth in those areas.
Yeah, exactly. I feel the same, that design systems should be like they involve a couple of disciplines that need to go into them, that inform them. So that's why you need like you said, accessibility specialists, and the developer needs to be involved in drafting, creating the design system, and so on. And I think that a really interesting point that kind of came to my mind as well. And before I say it, I just want to tell everyone to keep asking your questions in the chat, because at the end of the questions that we have prepared for tonight, we're going to take the questions from the chat and try to answer them. Hopefully all of them. So keep them coming, because we will definitely not ignore them and address them at the end. So with this being said, I'm getting back to the point I was trying to make. I remember having a conversation with Andy Bott, who at the time I think was the time when design systems exploded and everybody was talking about it, and it was this huge buzzword, and Brad Frost became world famous, and atomic design was on everyone's lips. And so in those times, he was often questioned by big companies, as a consultant to like, we need a design system. How do we build a design system and everything design system? And he realized, or he was trying to communicate to everyone that the problem is not that much building the design system as much as it is maintaining it. That companies
Yep.
kind of feel like, okay, we have it, we build it, it's
It's
done,
done.
that's it.
Yep.
But it's like a living organism. And I think that even in my own experience, after we had the design system kind of in place, then the harder times came in because we kept having to adjust it and reinform it, and things were getting challenged by the actual needs of using that particular component. And
Absolutely.
it was like the hard part felt after you have the design system. For me, was your experience similar, or how do you feel design systems are experienced after you kind of built at least some parts of them?
Absolutely.
Okay, so I also have an interesting question that I just want to make one point before I jump to the next question. The point is that you kept mentioning collaboration, and I think that that's another takeaway that I think the audience and everyone should take from this conversation, that collaboration is like the key aspect of a successful design system project and process. So where do you think design systems fail? What can go wrong with building design systems or with the design system itself? What are like the pitfalls, or the things that don't go so well?
I think you already answered the question before when you said that an organization just kind of thinks that it's
Sorry.
done once it's done. I think that's one, right? If you don't have like a dedicated person to focus on it, obviously it's fairly difficult in the beginning for certain people and certain organizations to like fully buy in and invest into something like that. But um, you need, like you mentioned, once you start building it, and if the organization starts adopting it and you see that, and the need is articulated even more, it becomes impossible to be a one person job. Like you really need more people, and if you don't start maintaining it, it's just going to end up not being used, and it's just going to die and people go back to old habits. I think that's just like the most frequent thing. The other thing that I think is also tied to product development in general, I think companies struggle measuring adoption and measuring success. Like a lot of people think the idea, okay, build this thing, it's done. And that's like number one pitfall. But the second one is you don't know how it's being used. You don't know if it's good or not. And you just kind of keep developing things and creating things without necessarily improving things from the past, or like analyzing the data or looking at the data. And then you can have, I think, a researcher even for design systems like strictly dedicated to help with that kind of thing, like look at the data, run constant usability tests, and I'm not talking about like basic stuff. Like you wouldn't run a usability test on a form field, but you would do that for patterns, and you would do that for like more complex workflows that are used across the application. Like for instance, if you work in the banking industry and you have, for instance, the workflow of new account opening, you think of the times when new account opening might happen. Well, it's when you're opening a debit card, is when you open a credit card, is when you create a loan for a house. Like all of those things count as new account opening. So it's a repetitive pattern. So making sure that the pattern accounts for all of the scenarios and it's tested and iterated accordingly. Iteration is one of the most important things. And if we think about early stages and things that can potentially lead to failure with a design system, is if there's still a battle and the idea that UX versus development owns the design system. Like I said in the beginning, it's shared ownership. That's why a design system is not a style guide, because it's not just colors, and it's not just this is how it looks. You have code source, because that's how developers talk. So same thing like with any other users and how you're working in product development, make sure it addresses that user's needs.
So, if we think about, okay, let's start building a design system. I'm in the mindset of like doing tangible, actionable insights for our audience. So, let's say I want to build it. Where do I host the design system? So I know that back in the day when we were starting to build a design system at my current employer, we had Envision come in New York in the office, and there was this Envision sales team, and they pitched us the design system manager, and there were so many solutions for hosting our design system. And and we ended up using Figma, and it worked very well for us. But is there like a better place to have your design system in? Like, do you need to have it in Confluence? Is it better to have it in, I don't know, Notion? How do what's like the best practice for actually hosting your design?
There are several variables that go into this decision. I think number one is who needs to see the design system? Like, is it just developer and designer, or are you planning on educating the entire company on this thing and create like that hype? And when you make that decision in terms of like where is the design system and where you store that information, I think those things need to be taken into account. For instance, like at our organization currently, we're using Storybook, just kind of like as a staging tool for the design system, but we still have the component library. Think of Storybook just as a main website where you basically have like all of the information about the design system, and everyone in the organization can access it. That way you don't run into like, hey, I don't have access to this file, or like if you have like a limited number of access of people in a platform like Figma or Sketch or licensing or like even development, like, hey, I can't access GitHub, so how do I get there? So that way you can store it on a website if you want everyone to see it, but if not, then you can have like different pieces. Like you can have the coding piece, which can be a simple CSS file package. Then you have the Figma piece for the designers, and then you have Confluence where you can store some of those things. That's how we were doing it in the past. So for instance, on Confluence, we were having use cases, and we were having a calendar with like the next upcoming updates were posted in there. Roadmap, it creates a roadmap visibility. And then the other thing is keeping in mind the project management side of it, whether or not you're using like Jira or, I don't know, I'm trying to think, Teams, like Microsoft, any type of tool from Microsoft to manage those daily tasks. Like one thing that I'm trying to do is create visibility into things that we're working on and sharing that board with everyone. It helps a lot because again, it's building trust and building that predictability with everyone. So there's multiple components of the design system. It's not just like, this is the guideline and where do I go with it? Like you can have a website if you want, but honestly in the past, this is the first time when we're actually doing a website to be accessed by everyone in the company. In the past was just a component library, and we use Zeppelin at one organization. We were building an internal website. Another company had like this, I don't even know what the heck that was. It's like from Salesforce, they offer like something, and that particular window you could go and see like it was specifically for developers, like how did they use and how do the classes behave and the component, just to kind of like see the component, not just the code. So those are some of the things, but it's not mandatory. Like again, it really depends on what you're trying to do with it. If you want people to see it, website. I don't know about tools. The only thing I know about right now is Storybook because that's what we're using, but I'm sure there's a bunch of other things. At some point, I even look at Pattern Lab, which is one of the things used by Brad Frost. The reason why we ended up not going with it, think about the ecosystem that you have in your organization. And if you're about to introduce a new tool that complicates the workflow of anyone, really, you're going to struggle with adoption again. So that's the reason why we were like, you know, we don't need an external website. Let's just do the component library for now. And the guidelines will stay in Zeppelin. And if we need to adapt and shift in the future, we can do that. So also having that open mindset that you can change direction at any point in time.
Incredible points. I feel like I'm growing just by having this conversation. Yeah, it helps like clarify a lot of things that somehow I experienced, but I wasn't able to like articulate or capture the essence of what was going on and what we could have done better. And indeed, I have to admit that we used Confluence in ING Bank when we were building the design system. We used Figma and UiPath. So and also a bit of Zeppelin here and there for hand up and everything. But I have to admit that we never considered building a website, which would have been such a great idea because it's much more. So one of the reasons for which we chose Figma was that it was easy to invite everyone and everyone could see them. So the transparency, the visibility that you were talking about, we felt that with Figma we would achieve that. But at the same time, I feel that having a website for people that are non-designers, I think Figma still feels a bit like there's this little gate that they need to kind of go beyond to be to have the ease of accessing Figma like we do as designers, or even like the developers would do as more technical people. So a website is a really nice idea that I never considered, and I love it very much. So I'm gonna ask my last question because we have a lot of questions coming up in the chat, and I want to make sure all of them are interesting. So I want to make sure that we cover them. My last question is one that I think also came up in the chat recently, and it's about, I think that you mentioned that you hate Lightning by Salesforce, or that probably, I mean, when you work with it's just when you get to work with a product or a design system or whatever that you understand how it's actually like. It may look very pretty from the outside, but when you get in the weeds with it, it's a different story. So I would want to ask you, what are some design systems that people can reference that are good examples, good practices? Which are your favorite design systems, if you want?
There is a website. Let me look it up. I think it's design repository.com or something like that, where they have like a bunch of different design systems.
Are you thinking about Adele? Adele.uxpin was
Oh
one which
no,
was.
yeah, that's like one of them, but they have like there's like this design systems repo.com. Okay, I found it. I'm gonna paste it in the chat. So they have a bunch of different design systems. It's just like all of the design system in the world. I'm gonna sound very basic what I'm about to say, but I love material design. Mainly because of their level of documentation. Obsessed. Like I don't think there's a design system out there that does a better job than material, honestly. Like they address everything. Sometimes the information is so much that's even a little bit redundant, I would say, but I think it's better, right? If you think about how people use material design, it makes sense, right? Because I might use material design and I have no clue what this is. I might not know enough about, I don't know, iOS, and they document all of those things, which is great. And I also love the information architecture on their site, because you have clearly delineated the idea of components versus development and designer guidelines. And I think that's super important because, again, you think about the audience and how the information is going to be utilized. I
This
pasted the
really makes.
link with the design systems, like all of the design systems in the chat. Hopefully that will help some folks.
Yeah, perfect. There's also, I want to also post a Dell UX pin. It's the one I don't know if it's better than this one. I think they don't have to be compared, but it's another repository of design system that I've been looking into when we were building design systems. And yeah, it makes me so happy to hear that you're also a big fan of material design, because I've been feeling that, but I was kind of even sometimes ashamed to like admit it, because it feels like it's the most obvious design system out there, and it's like you say, I don't know, you can't say the obvious. You can say the obvious as your favorite. It has to be something that's a bit more obscure or cool or
No,
interesting or unknown. But I
no.
feel that material design, even when I experienced feeling like a grandma talking about material design is the best design system in the, I feel like it is the best. I mean, it's the most robust. I think I can't even imagine. I would like to check if I can find any data around how many designers are working on the material design
We are
system.
currently, actually, our design system is built utilizing Beautify, which is used building material design systems. So it's like
Yeah.
full connection. Yeah.
So a lot of, I can't even imagine how many people are using it as utilizing it, but also I think there's a huge team behind it that's constantly
Oh yeah, for
researching
sure.
it. I think that it's really hard to top that in terms of how much research power they have, and improvement and iteration, and how much attention goes into this. So I think that is really hard to top that. So definitely, if you want to learn about design systems, just go on materialdesign.io and look over everything that's in there. It's also just fascinating. It also helps you learn UI design. So it's a great way if you want to improve your UI design skills then definitely it's also a very good exercise, a very strong exercise to go through all the components and understand what goes into an interface and how you can build better interactions. So, okay, I'm gonna jump to the questions that we have in the chat. And I'm gonna try to take them in chronological order, just to be fair. And the first question that was asked today was, can you say by Cohen Creations, his question was, can you say a design system needs to be readable, usable for a designer and a developer?
Absolutely. Yeah. They are co-creators and they're both users, right? So well, so here's the thing. Like we said earlier, the design system has like multiple pockets, right? Like you have the code idea, and then you have the guidelines, and then you have the actual design part. You don't fully need to understand the code, but you need to have an idea of what's going on. Like I appreciate my coworker a lot because I'm not a developer. Like I have the language, I know some front-end development. There was a period in my life when I tried to be a front-end developer and it didn't work out great. So so he's meeting me halfway and I'm meeting him halfway because we have that common language. And one of the things that we're doing, for instance, is like naming conventions plays an important part of the design system. So if someone refers to a specific part of the design system or component, if you have the same naming convention, is much easier and usable and everybody knows what you're talking about, rather than having discrepancies between like one part of the system and the other one. So usability, it can also be defined in different ways, right? Like, do you mean by being able to utilize the code? I can't do that. I'm not a developer, but I know how it's built. I understand what we're using, and then I know what it takes to do some work like that because I'm watching my partner doing it and my coworker, and it helps a lot. And you have to be at least aware of some things if you can't utilize all parts of the design system.
This is a really interesting perspective, and it's actually an answer or an angle that comes up again and again when people ask if designers should know how to code. And also Radu was answering this question in the chat earlier. No, you don't need to know how to code, but it's really an advantage if you are able to speak the language of the developers. It's an advantage for collaboration. It comes in as a help to bridge that gap and to build a shared vocabulary. And so that's where coding skills are important for a designer, because they're able to be better collaborators with the development team. And you also touched upon that, like observing and like just maybe sometimes even shadowing the work that the developer is doing around the design system can help with collaboration.
And to improve the design system, like one of the things that we're doing right now, I ran user interviews, which instead of like the users were the actual developers, and we were able to find like some of their current pain points, and we are addressing now them through the design system. So it's super important. And the whole code thing, like I would love to be able to code, and I think someday I'm gonna go back to it. But it's really, it's not necessary, but it's very helpful to speak the language. And the code side, it's like a whole beast within itself because it goes into architecture and tech debt, and it can become very complex within itself. So you have specialists for that area. Be aware of it, but you can't replace their role.
I have another interesting question. It comes from someone who doesn't have their name there. It's just a bunch of a sequence of numbers. So from A204796, the question is, any advice? I like the question. The question is, any advice on trying to build design system while working in a siloed organization? You don't have a direct relationship with the development team.
Oof, that's a tough one. You still need to find your advocates. I'm sorry, I don't have an easy answer for that. Like if you don't have someone that you can work with, you're probably going to struggle to push the design system through. You can build a UI kit. Like one of the things that we were doing at my previous organization, the UX team was so new and not mature and well developed. So what we ended up doing is, in order to have like a unified language between us, I ended up building like an internal UI kit, like very low fidelity. And that again, like helps building trust with developers and builds that level of predictability. Versus if you have like 5 different designers going to design handoff, delivering different things, and you never know what to expect for. So I think that can be like one step to think about how can you get close to them. And it might be just, I know like we work in remote environments right now, so it's slightly different, but schedule a call with them, like try to understand their environment, how they work. And if they see that you care, then they will probably become interested in your area as well. I go back to empathy. I don't like the word because I think it's too complex. Have at least some sympathy for the other coworkers and try to understand what they're going through every day. We can't expect just like a seat at the table without us trying to make them come to our table as well. It's got to be like a two-way street. So try to build that relationship first before you're going into building the actual design system, because you might put the work in there and it's not going to go all the way through, and you're wasting time.
I love this. I think there's no easy way to go about it. And I think that the bottom line answer would be just break the silo. Go
Yeah.
beyond the walls that are being built and just reach out to that person, find them, and try to actually just have a call at least with them. So another interesting question from Kenny. There's another question: how crucial is to know front end fundamentals for a designer? But I think we covered that. I'm gonna go to the next one from Kenny. Are junior designers expected to be comfortable with creating design systems from scratch before starting their first role?
Um, so when I started building my first design system, I was very junior. And I think I was very annoying actually, now that I think about it, because I was asking a lot of questions and inserting myself in all sorts of projects that maybe it wasn't really my time to be those type of projects. But you don't have to be comfortable. Like a lot of the things that we're doing, you're learning them as you're doing them. So don't think that when I started building my first design system, I necessarily knew everything. Like I think I read like 3 articles online and attended one event, and that was it. And then I just started doing it. And as you start doing it, you find those gaps. It's like, oh, I don't know how to do this. You go and you research and you find out the answer. Or I reached the bottom and I have no idea like what I have to do next in the process. Reach out to people. Like maybe you have a mentor, or ADP list has like a great community of designers. Reach out to designers over there in the community and try to find out what other people did in the past, because I'm sure you're gonna find the answers. Like even if you have a mentor, you have to also mentor yourself, if that makes sense. Like you have to have enough interest to go out there and learn those things. And if you're really passionate and have an interest for it, you're gonna find a way 100%.
Yeah, I think that I love this answer. And I think that also I just want to add the point around as designers, I think we're kind of thrown into things that we don't fully understand. And our job is to kind of find the answers and uncover the unknowns and so on. So I think that as designers, we are used or we always get exposed to a lot of uncertainty and a lot of unknown. And I think it's the same with any new project that comes our way, be the design system in this case, that it's just an interesting problem that we know nothing about, but that we need to kind of unpack and understand and try to solve to, I don't know, the best level of confidence that we can get to. So a question from Chelsea. It was sort of, I think you came back to it, but maybe if there's anything else that you would like to add to clarify the style guide idea. So the question is, not sure if can you elaborate on how the design system is not a style guide?
A style guide is a portion of the design system. Like you have the branding guidelines. I I don't know, maybe I think small, but when you say style guide, I strictly think branding. And branding is just a component of what you're doing. Like you have to think about workflows and you have to think about copywriting. Like that those things are not defined in style guide. Voice and tone, for instance. And also it also depends on your product. Like for instance, if you have internal platforms, just web applications, not websites, then it's most likely that the style guide doesn't cover those things. So The other thing is style guide is just it usually comes as a PDF or a component of Zeppelin or Figma or something, but it still doesn't fully encompasses the idea of a robust design system. You don't have a lot of documentation with those things. You don't have do's and don'ts, how material design has, for instance. Don't combine like this color variant with this other color variant because you might run into accessibility issues. It's just there for you to use it, and sometimes you might into issues if you just pick it up and don't necessarily test the appropriate things. And again, like as I mentioned, a design system 100% has to have code. A style guide doesn't have code.
This is a powerful difference, yes. Another question. I want to be time efficient, and I'm going to take 2 3 more questions, and then we'll be wrapping up and allowing some time for the networking part. So from to me done, I hope I didn't butcher the name. How can you improve a design system that already exists?
Yep. So you always, when I came, for instance, at Automox, they were using the idea of V1 and V2 of the design system, which first off, never use that because it confuses people, and there's no V1 and V2. It's a living document and it's going to grow and change, period. So we killed that finally. It makes me really happy. But the first thing I ended up doing was an inventory. Like I familiarized myself with the design system, some of the stuff that existed, familiarized myself with the personas in that organization, met with key stakeholders, tried to understand what they do, who they are, who are like our friends versus our people that might need more education in the UX area, for instance. And then obviously spend some time on the platform to understand, or platforms depending on what organization has, to understand like gaps, how things work. Is it really that bad? Like what's like the biggest gap that I'm seeing right now, and does the current design system solve that? And you need to analyze it. You need to look at the design system. Like one of the things, for instance, that we are working with a dark theme. Accessibility with dark theme is an absolute nightmare. I'm gonna say it. Like I'm having a heck of a time. And one of the things that I first noticed was like some of the color ratios were off. So I started off by redefining the colors. So you start looking at the design system and find those type of gaps. Like sometimes you might have, maybe the components are fine, maybe things are working well, but maybe you don't have enough documentation. So maybe work with QE to find like those type of use cases and put them in the design system, and make sure that developers have enough documentation as well. Or maybe the design system is perfectly fine and you just need to add to it. Go ahead and do a lunch and learn, introduce yourself, and think about where you want to take the design system as far as next step. But always start with analysis and inventory. I never liked people that just joined an org and just started changing things for the heck of changing things. Like if there are things that work fine, there's no need to change it. But if you see something off, work with your teammates and you can correct those things with time.
I think that we are very close to the time box that we have set for today. I'm just amazed at how many questions came in. Thank you so much for asking so many interesting questions. It really hurts to have to not answer them. I'm thinking of a way in which we could like screenshot the questions, capture them, save them somehow, and maybe have a part two next year, or even answer them in
Let's do a
in
live.
yeah, alive. I don't know
Let's
what to
just do
do,
a
but
live.
I don't want to abandon the questions that came here. I think they're valuable. They're really interested to discuss. And yeah, I think that I'm gonna go ahead and wrap up this event for now. Somehow, I promise, Radu, you are an inventive person. Maybe you can capture these questions, and then we can somehow get back on them in a future occasion, because they're really good. I mean, I want to learn the answers to these questions. So I'm also curious myself. So yeah, before wrapping up, I just want to remind everyone that if you're into interesting events around the UX design and the design industry in general, and interesting topics of the day for UX designers, both junior and senior, make sure you follow Mento Design Academy on Meetup, because we will be hosting at least 2 events per month for the coming year. All of them will be free. All of them will be nice. I promise. It's my personal mission. And for those of you who don't know what Mental Design Academy is, it's a UX bootcamp that we launched in 2021, but we actually started in 2020. So it's not a baby anymore. It's growing. And with many happy students already. So if you want to transition to UX design, although I think that the audience here is a bit more mature because design systems are a bit of a sophisticated topic if you want. But if you know anyone who's transitioning into UX design, Mental Design Academy would be my recommendation because I built it and I know it's good. Okay, so with this commercial, I'm gonna thank Catalina for accepting this invitation, for all the incredible insights that she gave me. I'm gonna go look smart in front of my team with all the all the new insights that I've gained today. And like I said, now is the time when everybody can put their LinkedIn profile in the chat. We will leave this room open for a couple more minutes, even if we mute and stop the video, so we can all like open the links and connect to one another. So it's more than just an event that you watch. It's also a networking opportunity. Catalina, thank you so much. If you have any closing thoughts or words for today, I'm giving you the opportunity now.
Thanks for the invite. Really appreciate it. And any way you can think I can answer those questions, I can be boring and doing in a Word doc, or we can figure out another event or way to interact with the group and answer those questions. I'm available anytime.
This is actually an interesting idea. What if we create like this living document where we post all the questions and then we share it on the meetup messages, and then everyone gets access to it and they're there to be living by themselves beyond this event. It's an interesting story. It's an interesting idea. We will consider it. Anyhow, we will communicate on the meetup messaging. We'll send you all a message on whatever way, creative way we find to solve this. This event will also be uploaded on YouTube. We will also be uploading last week's event about personal branding as a UX designer. It was also an extremely interesting conversation. And so, like I said, if you want to stay up to date with our events, follow Mental Design Academy on Instagram or on Meetup. And thank you so much to everyone who joined. And thank you for the incredibly smart questions. I really appreciate them. And I'm happy that we get the chance to meet each other. And that's it for today. Bye, everyone. The room will remain open for the links. Don't forget. Bye.
One thing to add really quick, if anyone wants to connect, obviously I'm available on LinkedIn. So if you want to ask questions that way, that works as well. And I'm also on ADP, so you can schedule a session with me and we can have a coffee and talk more design system stuff.
Bye, everyone.